it's only natural to imitate success. Throughout video game history, there are countless examples of clones, shameless mimics that ride aboard the coattails of others. Call it inspiration, an homage, or just a plain rip-off. No good idea goes without a few retreads. On rare occasion, a game's influence will be such that it won't just inspire a few imitations, but forge an entirely new genre. Doom is a massively important step in the development of 3D action games. One that defined the first-person shooter and changed gaming forever. So, what inspired such a revolutionary game? What did Doom do that Wolfenstein didn't? And how much of its influence remains in games today? The early 1990s. A time untinged by guilt. When action movies were unironic, thrash metal was at its peak. And unlike the vice-ridden 1980s, all you needed for a good time was pizza and video games. id Software were living the dream. Their previous success brought access to all kinds of hedonistic thrill. But their core passion remained, and their creative freedom was unfettered. Only one obstacle remained. How do you beat a game like Wolfenstein 3D? While most of the id team were working on delivering Spear of Destiny, the first strokes of their next project were being made by John Carmack. He was discontent with Wolfenstein's engine limitations, and with the increasing pace of the PC gaming market, he could afford to target more impressive hardware. Instead of running on a 286 with less than 1 megabyte of RAM, id's new game would demand at least a 386 with 4 megabytes, and only a top-of-the-line 486 would suffice for the most impressive performance. Some of Carmack's improvements to the Wolfenstein engine ended up in a game called Shadowcaster, developed by Raven Software, a first-person RPG with similar ambitions to Ultima Underworld. It exists as an evolutionary step between Wolfenstein and Doom, the upgraded tech providing a hint at what was to come later in the year from id. Walls and ceilings were now texture mapped, a corner cut less necessary on newer machines, and a chance to inject more variety both underfoot and overhead, including outdoor areas. Diminished lighting allowed texture colors to be gradually faded into the darkness, allowing for better distance cues and variable lighting. Compared to the static, flat light of Wolfenstein, it made a substantial difference to the game's atmosphere. Another major upgrade was to the level architecture. Grid-based no more, walls could be constructed at any angle, at any position. Better yet, floors and ceilings could now be different heights, allowing for platforms, stairs, windows, and elevators. A massive leap forward in terms of level design. Its new, upgraded engine unlocked huge technical potential. All they needed now was a good idea. Clearly, they were onto something good with the 3D shooter formula, so a further exploration seemed logical. Creative director Tom Hall wanted to revisit Commander Keen, a shift away from realistic violence to a cartoon aesthetic, and a chance to tell a more in-depth story. However, the others were less convinced. It wasn't a compelling narrative that made Wolfenstein 3D a hit, it was its fast-paced and instant action. As John Carmack put it, story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. It was the era of the self-assured action hero, with a hefty arsenal of bombastic one-liners. Yippee-ki-yay, hasta la vista. This is my boomstick. There would be considerable influence from cinema, not through cutscenes or lens flares, but instead as inspiration for the setting, mood, and attitude. Even the name stems from a quote taken from a Tom Cruise film. In The Color of Money, his pool hustling character is asked what resides within his cue case. with a cocky smile, and pause for effect, he retorts, "In here." Doom. Doom's cybernetic heart beats with the rhythm of science fiction. Future soldiers, high-tech weaponry, and isolated installations on a far-flung world. The Alien films are a key influence, to the point where Doom was originally planned as a licensed tie-in, although this idea was ditched in order to retain more creative freedom. Still, there's no shortage of parallel elements. The grizzled space marines sent in to investigate an anomaly of unknown origin. The interstellar conglomerates operating at the frontier of human exploration, and questionable ethics that unleash dark, dangerous secrets. The Alien films and Doom also share a common visual inspiration: the disturbing surreality of H.R. Giger. His Necronomicon defined the terrifying look of alien xenomorph, and inspired countless nightmares. Giger's only official contribution to video games was a graphical adventure called DeXiaZ and its sequel, but his work's overall influence is far broader. Fearful symmetry amidst an uncomfortable place, somewhere between sex and death, demons and machines. It's this blend that provides the key aesthetic for Doom, a fusion of metallic sci-fi with fleshy hellspawn. The satanic influences originate from id's Dungeons & Dragons sessions, where, at the climax of a lengthy campaign, the entire planet was overrun with demons. No longer constrained by the grid-based stone walls of Wolfenstein, its imagination could run riot, an indulgence of pure twisted fantasy. A departure from a loose historical basis, from Heil Hitler to Hail Satan. Id have never been particularly afraid of controversial subjects. Still, the devil has all the best tunes, and a game like Doom needed a killer soundtrack. It didn't have to look too far for inspiration. The tunes playing on their office stereo would provide ample material. Tracks evocative of Metallica, Slayer, Pantera, Judas Priest. True, they were lo-fi MIDI renditions, but from the first level to the last, Doom is chock full of thrash riffs. Gory B-movie horror would provide inspiration too, with films like Evil Dead 2 a particular favourite. Its influence is clear in a number of places, such as human enemies possessed by demons, in a similar manner to the Deadites from Evil Dead. The chainsaw and later addition of a double-barreled shotgun are taken straight from the film, and the gory, blood-soaked action that ensues is only natural. Caffeine-fueled, pizza-fed, and a love letter to the culture they consumed. All the elements were starting to come together. A fusion of hell, sci-fi, and fantasy. Alien demons with a twist of Satan. As the end of 1993 approached, so too did Doom's release. Anticipation was sky high, with anxious fans following development through newsgroups and BBS. Confident, it declared that their next game would be Wolfenstein times a million. The hype was real, but could they deliver? Doom's myriad influences ought to make for a crowded mess of ideas, but in the absence of explanation, it works. Here's a shotgun. No more questions. Just get out there and shoot some demons on Mars. Like with Wolfenstein, very little time is wasted. Action is instant, and you're flung into combat straight from the first beat. The level choreography is very similar too. You spawn, weapon in hand, fight through room after room of enemies, and make your way to the exit. Again, levels are episodically grouped, each culminating in a boss fight. The original release comprised 3 such episodes. Knee Deep in the Dead was the first, an introduction to the Mars base on Phobos, and the incursion of Hellspawn into its metallic sci-fi interiors. The second takes you to Deimos, the shores of hell. A descent into diabolical madness, and a border between the human and demon domains. The third was Inferno, a full realization of satanic terror, and a test of the hero's mettle against hell's full fury. This approach was a tried and tested formula. Many elements were retained from Wolfenstein, but Doom was anything but more of the same. For instance, the arcade influences were chamfered to be far less frustrating. Gone were the limited lives. Death was now but a pause, with tougher levels repeatable until cracked. Also absent were the high score tables and the point-scoring pickups. This wasn't Pac-Man. Slaughter is its own reward. Doom also evolved its health economy, with a greater quantity and variety of health pickups. Bonus files litter the levels, with each only providing a single point of stamina, but providing a strong incentive to stay on the move to gradually replenish lost health. Stimpaks provide more immediate relief, and the full-size medpacks and rarer supercharges are a sight for sore eyes when you find yourself in trouble. The addition of armor adds another dimension, with the standard green pickup absorbing a third of all damage until depleted, and the rarer blue suit cutting all incoming damage by half. Fully decked out, taking on the hordes of hell almost seems easy, but a quick comeuppance awaits the overconfident. Health pickups are not necessarily the best solution for every first-person shooter, but one thing is certain: cowering behind cover won't do you any good in Doom. The level design is perhaps the most drastic change from Wolfenstein 3D. The grid-based mazes were gone. Doom's architectural enhancements meant these rigid walls were instead replaced with more freeform, fantastical spaces. Rather than conforming to realistic designs, the Mars base has a more abstract composition than might be expected of a typical sci-fi installation. Rather than shooting through corridor after boring corridor, the chambers and passages are varied, serving an unknown purpose in universe, but making for a far better experience as a game. This detachment from reality also makes for a far more organic transition to a twisted vision of hell as the game unfolds. Animated textures were another new introduction, used to particularly good effect in creating pools of noxious liquid, rivers of blood, and molten lava. Serving as a punishment for falling from an intended path, but also enticing the player with the potential of secrets, the risk of damage versus the reward of hidden supplies. As well as pools of toxic waste, Doom's levels are littered with barrels, of a particularly volatile nature. It isn't the first game to indulge in the trope of explosive barrels, but it might be the first FPS. Doom's world is far more dynamic than Wolfenstein's ever was. Beyond simple doors and push walls, now massive segments of level geometry could move in response to the player. This was limited to up and down motion only, as the binary space partitioning of the level data required considerable pre-calculation. This was perfect for doors, staircases, platforms, and elevators, however, and dynamic level elements are a well-used feature throughout Doom's episodes. Now, the levels could react to the player, and not always through the explicit press of a button. Some triggers were invisible. These new tools gave the level designers ample chance to flex their creativity, unleashing fresh monster closets to repopulate a previously trodden path, drastically altering a level to reveal entirely new areas, or setting traps for greedy players. A tempting power-up atop a well-lit podium in a seemingly quiet room, but redeeming the prize unleashes far more than you might have bargained for. These dynamic triggers are used to great effect in tandem with variable lighting. Dim corridors that recede to distant gloom, strobe lighting, and pitch blackness. Sometimes the game will turn off the lights while simultaneously unleashing an enemy assault. Deprived of a vital sense while the guttural growls of demons surround you, such moments are terrifying and bring the game's horror influence to life. Compared to Wolfenstein's stark VGA palette, the dimmer tones of Doom boast an atmosphere unlike anything else of the era. Dynamic, diverse, and dangerous. The virtual spaces that Doom forged might not resemble reality, but they were the perfect stage for its hellish theatrics. A performance demands players, and our protagonist stands center stage. His story? Not important. His name? Even less so. Doom Guy is a blank slate, a space marine with no identity, stripped of humanity and built for only one purpose. The Spartan detail is intentional, making for an easier self-insert into the player's blood-soaked boots. And in any case, the real stars of the show were the hero's supporting cast. The weapons of Doom follow a similar progression to Wolfenstein, a hierarchy of arms of escalating power. However, there were far more to choose from, defining the classic FPS tradition of a single soldier lugging an impractical arsenal of several heavy weapons. The introduction of different ammunition types adds a new complexity to gameplay, with ammo availability shaping weapon use. The weapons themselves are more varied too, with a blend of hitscan, melee, and projectile options, each mandating different strategy. You start with the pistol, a basic, slow-firing weapon. It's adequate for facing off with the weakest enemies, but not much more. Still, it's better than nothing. Should you run out of ammunition, you'll have to rely on your bare fists to fight. And punching demons can be a dangerous proposition. The Berserk power-up can even the odds a little, multiplying your melee power by a factor of 10, a force capable of turning the basic enemies into a thin red paste. Equally visceral is the chainsaw, an alternate option that rips and tears through flesh in a particularly satisfying way. Getting up close and personal can be dangerous, however, so you'll spend most of your time using the more powerful ranged options. And the pump-action shotgun is a mainstay of Doom shooting action. It's devastating up close, tearing through low-level foes like paper, and is an effective weapon for highly mobile, aggressive use. Rewarding a high-octane style of play is what separates Doom from the more modern trend of cover-based shooters. Instead of cowering in the shadows waiting for a red screen to fade, Doom's action is unrelenting, brutal, and bloody good fun. Unlike the slower-firing shotgun, the chain gun offers continuous firepower for effectively suppressing larger groups. Perfect for those who like to keep the trigger held down, and a far better use of bullets than the anemic pistol. The rocket launcher fires slow-moving projectiles which detonate on impact, dealing massive explosive damage. Great for quickly culling enemies at a distance, but very dangerous at a closer range. Getting caught in your own blast radius will quickly deplete your health. The plasma gun rapidly spits blue balls of energy, effectively interrupting enemy attacks and quickly dispatching even the most robust of foes. Even so, the ultimate weapon on offer is the BFG 9000. A bigger brother to the plasma gun, the BFG takes a while to charge, but can clear an entire room with just a single shot. An impressive arsenal, a variety bolstered since Wolfenstein, and a standard for future games to meet. But what good is such an array of weapons with no bad guys to shoot? Luckily, there's no such shortage of enemies. There's a whole demonic ensemble of Satan claymation. They're drawn as sprites on screen, 2D entities within a 3D world, but each monster is drawn facing multiple directions to permit rotation. In order to expedite the drawing process, many of the monsters were first sculpted as models, photographed, and digitized. This approach gave the larger monsters more naturalistic, believable form, unlike more rigid hand-drawn sprites. These speak of corpulent demon flesh. The realization of these monsters also benefited from the game's sound design, with each type exuding idle noises and announcing their discontent at the player's presence. Coupled with the dark, dangerous chambers of Doom's levels, the addition of guttural sounds in the gloomy distance further enhanced the game's mood. And the battle cry of the greater demons sparks terror like no other. The lowliest of Hell's minions are the human opponents, possessed by some unseen demon force. The first encounter and a common sight throughout the first episode. Some wield machine guns, others shotguns. Both provide easy kills and a steady supply of ammunition. The brown imps fling fireballs from a distance and tear flesh up close. They're tougher than humans, but their attacks are easy to dodge, and they still succumb to a single shotgun blast. The pink demons are much tougher. Sinewy walls of flesh that lack a ranged attack, but make up for it with a fervor for consuming thy flesh. Worse still, some such demons are not pink, but invisible. Spectres that are hard to see in the best of conditions, and an unseen menace in darker spaces. Hell plays home to the lost souls, fire-branded skulls that fling themselves towards you, fast-moving and a tough target to hit. Cacodemons are large red spherical monsters that spew fast-moving fireballs whilst floating in midair. Demon meatballs with a penchant for char-grilled prey. Beyond lie the greater demons. The Hursine Barons of Hell serve as a culmination of Doom's first episode. Satanic brothers that serve as guardians to the gates of the abyss. Standing head and shoulders above their minions, they are unyielding in the face of whatever punishment you mete out, flinging green fireballs at you with all their fury. In later episodes you'll meet yet more Barons, only as regular troops, rather than in a boss-like capacity. Episodes 2 and 3 end with yet greater menace. The Cyber Demon is half goat, half rocket launcher, and all archfiend. Highly resistant and more than happy to dispense his rockets in your direction, it takes a well-supplied marine to even have a hope of dispatching this vile demon. Still, at least you can dodge rockets. Bullets prove a mite more difficult. The ultimate evil is the Spider Mastermind. A squishy brain on stilts, armed with a super chain gun, and a bad attitude. Its instantly landing attack will quickly kill anyone foolish enough to stand in the open. Firing from cover, your best hope for success. Enough firepower, and even the most vile of Hell's denizens will be reduced to a puddle of blood, guts, and brains. Quite the menagerie. With distinct designs, varied tactics and attacks, and eerie presence, Doom's monsters are memorable, frightening, awesome. Between a protagonist laden with guns and a host of evil demonic opponents, what follows next is only natural. Jibbing, that's jibs like giblets, not gibs like goblet, are one of Doom's gory ways. A red shower of body parts and sickening sound effect, your reward for a particularly brutal kill. It's a development of Wolfenstein's death camps, but the gory death animation of the bosses extend to all enemies instead, and can occur as a natural part of gameplay. Doom wasn't the first gory game to feature fleshy jibs, but it codified the name, and its later influence made sure similar dismemberment would remain a hallmark of violent shooters. No guts, no glory. Visceral action is the perfect accompaniment to a first-person perspective. Or better way to experience the thrill of being knee-deep in the dead. Shooting mechanical monsters is good fun, but computer-controlled opponents are predictable, and victory over the AI eventually rings hollow. Single player is great fun, but it's the multiplayer that really gave Doom longevity. And in the years following its release, The sounds of competitive combat were commonly heard anywhere near a computer network. Such was its popularity that network administrators were often forced to take action. The congestion caused by players could bring even the largest network to a standstill. It is the game that coined the term deathmatch and gave birth to a now long-standing tradition of digital carnage. Another important contribution to Doom's longevity was its modability. It wasn't the first game to support user-created content, but it was very successful in this regard. Its generosity played a key role, providing level editors and tools for editing the game's files. Content creators were able to make new levels, add new graphics and sound, all with relative ease. These mods were packaged in convenient files called WADs, an acronym for Where's All the Data? A single file easily distributed, and containing anything from minor tweaks to a full-blown total conversion. The most popular WADs drew from pop culture, with locations, characters, graphics, and sound bites gratuitously taken from film and TV. Others indulged in more original work, with imagination unfettered and the keys to Doom's creation. With the dawn of the internet, there was no shortage of enthusiastic talent keen to share their skills. The right game at the right time, Doom led to a burgeoning modding community and forged a tradition that endures today. Groundbreaking technology, an atmospheric and scary setting, fast-paced and addictive gameplay, frantic multiplayer deathmatch, and fully moddable to boot. Truly a complete package. And the first episode was free. Who could resist an offer like that? Doom proved a success by every measure. The fans loved it, the gaming press praised it at every turn, and it sold by the millions. It repeated the shareware success story of Wolfenstein. With the first episode available for free, copies of the game spread like wildfire, with an estimated 10 million installations. While the shareware model had proven successful, the retail market for PC games had expanded since the days of Wolfenstein, and boxed copies could attain a broader reach than mail order. The Doom franchise first found its way onto shelves with the rapid release of its sequel in 1994, with Doom 2: Hell on Earth. It was not a major change from the original shareware release, retaining the same engine and overall format, but it came with an all-new set of levels, enemies, graphics, and an extra weapon. The Super Shotgun is a defining difference between Doom and Doom 2, boasting double the barrels and nearly triple the damage. It provides an extension of the shotgun's usefulness, with even more close-range power. And while it fires more slowly than the pump action, the ability to take out crowds of enemies with a single spray of buckshot is quite satisfying. A host of new enemies await your wrath, complementing Doom's original set and providing new challenges and hazards. A new human enemy, the chain gun guy, is amongst the first you'll meet. A little tougher than his brothers, and a lot meaner. The Hell Knights are lesser barons of hell, weaker than their superiors, but still very much a threat. The spooky rocket-launching skeletons are known as the Revenants, a clattering assembly of shrieking undead. The grotesque mancubuses have a little more meat on their bones, a corpulent pile of flesh and rockets. Miniature versions of the spider mastermind, known as the Arachnotrons, are equipped with a powerful plasma weapon. The pain elementals resemble brown cacodemons, but instead of fireballs, they spawn lost souls instead. And the Arch-Vile, a mysterious figure, quite happy to immolate all in their path. A host of new denizens, a host of new ways to die. The 30 new levels were presented as a single episode, Hell on Earth. A diverse set, with some more mundane locations, and some truly evil, hellish labyrinths. Tricks and traps galore as the game more confidently exploits player expectation to endless surprise. More creative levels like Barrels of Fun offer the player a dilemma, where the need to shoot is tempered by the reluctance to self-destruct. With the experience gained from the first 3 episodes, the level designs were more confident, whimsical, and certainly more devious. Doom 2 gave ardent fans another slice of shooting action, and its retail presence introduced it to a new audience. Between it and its shareware incarnation, Doom would dominate the home computer gaming scene. If you had a PC, you had to have Doom. Doom would go on to boast a larger install base than Windows, a claim no game since could possibly make. Such was its influence that it would define the first-person shooter genre. For years after its release, any FPS would be dubbed a Doom clone. Such an honour was not without warrant. There was certainly no shortage of attempts to out-Doom Doom. With its games enjoying massive commercial success, plenty of other developers were keen to taste a slice of the Doom clone pie. Nascent studio Bungie were then champions of the Mac gaming scene, and Marathon in 1994 provided 3D shooting action for the rival platform. Even LucasArts, best known then for their point-and-click adventure games, leveraged the Star Wars IP into the first-person shooter domain with Dark Forces in 1995. The most prolific Doom rivals came from its former publisher for Wolfenstein, Apogee Software, who rebranded as 3D Realms in 1994. Ken Silverman's build engine would drive their games, most notably Duke Nukem 3D. A game clearly made in Doom's image, but with a swagger and style all of its own. Later titles like Blood, Shadow Warrior, and Redneck Rampage are generally well remembered. Not so much as technical innovators, but as varied, fun experiences with an abundance of charm. However, none of these imitations are remembered quite as fondly as the real thing. Attempts to out-Doom Doom were, of course, doomed. That's not to say all versions of Doom are equal. The DOS version was the definitive, but the covetous consoles were also granted ports of varying quality of their own. The 16-bit consoles of the era lacked the grunt needed to shift textures at the required rate, leading to some severe compromises. The Super Nintendo version made valiant use of the Super FX 2 chip, but while this coprocessor assistance made the game viable, its frame rate was poor and resolution inadequate. Even the 32-bit power of Sega's ill-fated 32X add-on couldn't muster a faithful rendition. While its frame rate was superior, nearly every other aspect suffers. Lighting effects were reduced, as was the color palette and number of textures, and the music was terrible. It would take a new generation of consoles to deliver something more convincing. And as a new wave of 32-bit and 64-bit machines trickled in, each tried their hand at matching the PC. Doom was the must-have next-gen game, and the Atari Jaguar, 3DO, and Sega Saturn all made an attempt. But despite their increased power, the conversions were underwhelming. The marketing hype around bit counts fell flat in the face of poor performance. The PlayStation version was more convincing, with full-screen graphics that ran well, and novel features such as alpha transparency and colored lighting. There were some concessions. The level geometry was simplified compared to the PC version, and RAM limitations restricted the use of some assets. Not all monster types could appear in the same level, for instance. Still, compared to earlier ports, it was far more playable, and the PlayStation's more confident 3D performance no doubt played a part in its success. Perhaps the most impressive version of Doom on the consoles came in 1997 for Nintendo's new platform, with Doom 64. With new graphics, levels, and story, it is a drastic departure from the original Doom, and is generally considered a spin-off. The N64's analog control stick is far better suited to FPS movement than a digital D-pad, and was a step towards the twin-stick controls used on consoles today. Between Doom 64, Turok, and GoldenEye, the viability of first-person shooters on a console had arrived. Meanwhile, on PC, the original Doom saw a retail release in 1995 as the Ultimate Doom, capitalizing on those who missed the shareware release, and adding a bonus fourth episode, Thy Flesh Consumed. With the widespread success of Doom, there was a thirst for more, and expansion packs were one means of slaking this desire. The master levels for Doom 2 boasted 20 additional levels from a multitude of designers, curated by id and given a retail release. Similarly, Final Doom combined two 32-level episodes into one package: TNT Evolution and the Plutonia Experiment. These episodes were community-created efforts, officially licensed and distributed as a commercial product, but they wouldn't exist if not for id's accepting policy towards modding. Aside from the scores of user-made modifications, the Doom engine was put to good use in a commercial setting with two releases from Raven Software. Heretic in 1994 built on the work they did with Shadowcaster, an atmospheric fusion of Doom with RPG elements, with magic in the stead of firearms amidst a gothic fantasy world. A sequel, Hexen Beyond Heretic, followed in 1995, further expanding on the Doom paradigm with a dark fantasy twist. With a choice of 3 character classes, each with their own weapons, and a deviation from Doom's linear level progression, Raven served up a counterpart to Doom that had familiar choreography, but with merits all of its own. The RPG elements in Strife were even more developed, with hub worlds, relatively seamless level transitions, and NPCs with dialogue. All this is blended with familiar shooting action, crossbows, flamethrowers, and enemies lurking in corridors. It is probably the most advanced use of Doom's engine, although by the time of its release, the technology was starting to show its age. By 1996, the Doom engine's technical edge had been lost. The dawn of hardware acceleration had arrived, and full 3D engines were the future. What do you get if you cross a violent shooter with a marketing campaign for a breakfast cereal? Good question, glad you asked. Chex Quest is the result of such a bizarre union. A total conversion of Doom's gameplay with the violence removed. Instead of killing your alien opponents, you must zorch them back to their home planet. Given away with boxes of cereal, the first video game distributed this way, Chex Quest found a grateful audience in the younger market. A far cry from Doom's more mature audience, but targeting adults grants no exemption from controversy. Video games were taking some flack in the media at this time. Games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap were upheld as a cause for censorship, eventually leading to the industry's self-regulation of the ESRB. Satanism has been a source of alarm for centuries, and even in recent decades has proven to provoke concern. From Ouija boards, Dungeons and Dragons, and heavy metal, any form of entertainment that dared tread near the occult triggered a new moral panic. And Doom was another sacrificial goat at the altar of outrage. Can video games train someone to kill? Flight simulators can teach someone to fly, so the use of technology to train infantry seems plausible enough. In 1996, the United States Marine Corps expressed an interest in using computer-based wargames as a means for training. A modification for Doom 2, called Marine Doom, was the result. Intended for cooperative play with a fire team of 4 Marines, The scenario was designed for teamwork and supporting fire in the face of an enemy threat. Military exercises are one application, but the simulation of cold-blooded murder is another thing entirely. In 1999, Doom found itself blamed for the death of 13 in a high school shooting, the Columbine Massacre. The pair responsible were avid fans of violent first-person shooters, and one had even created his own custom levels for Doom. In the wake of such a tragedy, there was no easy explanation, but video games alone are no cause for atrocity. Doom emerged relatively unscathed from this contention, despite numerous lawsuits and no end of media criticism. But even now, in a more enlightened age, video games have not seen the end of outrage. After the release of Final Doom in 1996, the franchise was left fallow in favour of its next big project. A pause that would persist until the 2004 release of Doom 3. To say that expectations were high would be an understatement. Doom was a legend amongst FPS, and so nothing less than a revolution would suffice. While it remained a capable developer, they were not the same dynamic team of the early 90s. Nor was game development quite the same. Nevertheless, with John Carmack behind Doom 3's new engine, id Tech 4, from a technical perspective, there were some very impressive new features. A host of new graphical techniques were now supported, stuff we take for granted today. Bump mapping, normal mapping, and specular highlighting. Dynamic per-pixel lighting sold the game's atmosphere, and the illumination, or absence of it, made for a tense, terrifying experience. Your only weapon against the darkness was a flashlight, carving a feeble yet essential beam through the gloom. So you were forced to exchange sight for the ability to defend yourself. This design choice was not universally liked. A duct tape mod was a popular addition, permitting the use of a weapon and light simultaneously. A later re-release, Doom 3 BFG Edition, adopted this change into official gameplay, along with graphical and audio enhancements for more modern machines. An expansion pack developed by Nerve Software followed in 2005, Doom 3 Resurrection of Evil. Much like Doom 2 did for the original, it added new levels, enemies and weapons, including the legendary double-barreled shotgun, and a weapon resembling Half-Life 2's gravity gun called the Grabber. Otherwise, it plays in much the same fashion as the vanilla game. Gloomy corridors on Mars with myriad demons prepared for a welcome. Doom 3 was a success both critically and commercially. After all, it was a full-blown sequel to Doom. But it's fair to say that it doesn't quite live up to the original. From an audio-visual perspective, it was spectacular, but there was little evolution in terms of gameplay, an over-reliance on jump scares, and not much deviation from the standard FPS fare of the era. Still, its release renewed interest in the franchise, to the point where someone thought it might be a good idea to make a Doom movie, with Carl Urban starring alongside The Rock. Films based on video games don't have a particularly good track record, and Doom didn't do much to change this. But the action-packed first-person sequence almost makes it worth the price of admission. The same year saw the release of Doom RPG, a phone game designed for the then-emerging mobile market. Gameplay is turn-based and movement grid-based. Nevertheless, an impressive distillation of Doom's essence onto the weak pocket hardware of the time. Doom Resurrection was another mobile title made for iPhones in 2009. A pared-down version of Doom 3, this time as a rail shooter. A fun enough diversion for idle thumbs, but Doom's strength always lay in its classic FPS formula. What would we do without the first-person shooter? They remain a common sight today, and while we might be past the recent peak of modern military-themed games, the genre isn't going away anytime soon. Doom's DNA runs through them all. If not through having direct influence, then via another game that does. Half-Life is another seminal game that took direct inspiration. A cataclysmic invasion of a sci-fi installation, aliens galore, and an abundance of toxic waste throughout its levels. Similarly, Doom's lack of cutscenes or cinematics laden with exposition laid the foundations for experiential storytelling, relying on in-engine events to tell a story. Halo Combat Evolved is a game which divides the old school from the new. Defined by its defiance of Doom's conventions, with its 2-weapon limit, regenerating shields, and large-scale vehicular combat. However, for all its differences, enough of Doom remains. Both share heavy Aliens influence, with their sci-fi setting and grizzled space marines. High-tech installations, a varied array of enemy types, and a protagonist almost entirely stripped of identity. Doom's blank slate character paved the way for the generic leads seen in what feels like most modern games. A shaven-headed average Joe designed to tread the path of least financial risk. The horror elements of Doom, variable lighting and invisible triggers, have been mirrored in games like System Shock, Fear, and other such scary FPS, with scripted moments designed to surprise and/or terrify the player. Without their lack of light, gloomy corridors and areas cast into blackness, games like Dead Space or Alien Isolation wouldn't have half the impact they manage. Today, Doom's innovations might seem obvious, and perhaps they are, but it lit the way for future games to tread, and its massive popularity cemented its influence. Modern games have tampered with Doom's purity, however. No longer do games give you the reins to their experience, instead forcing you down more linear corridors in the name of cinematic impact. Some of the longing for old-school gameplay is seen through rose-tinted glasses, and even the classics are not without faults. Doom is far from ready to retire, however. It still has an indomitable spirit. More recently, interest in the game has been rekindled and given a fresh coat of red paint with the help of a mod. Brutal Doom. A fundamental overhaul with some drastic changes. The core is unmistakable fast-paced arcade action, but there are more modern elements grafted on. A more reactive HUD with bloodstains and bullet holes, smoother animations and more of them, AI buddies, reloads, new enemy attacks, and more gore than ever. The transformation might offend some purists, but it is unquestionably exhilarating. A fusion of elements from modern games with a classic sensibility, and goblet loads of blood for good measure. Perhaps FPS of the future will take heed, and perhaps the franchise will see a return to glory, for a new Doom waits in the wings. A decade since Doom 3, and over 2 since the originals. At the time of writing, a 4th Doom is mere months away. One hell of a pair of boots to fill, but the recent success of Wolfenstein: The New Order might be a good sign. Can the reboot live up to the name which it dares to bear? Will its violence fly unflinching in the face of outrage? Shall it inspire the same thrill the original did back in '93? Only time will tell. Every inch the compelling experience. The world was ill-prepared for a game like Doom. An amalgam of pop culture, it borrowed heavily from its era, but paid back the debt with interest. From influenced to influential, and an impact that resonates today. A new genre forged, and gameplay choreography re-rehearsed countless times. Doom's success invited others to follow in its footsteps. And why not? It's only natural. There is magic in Doom's heart. It's primitive, still raw, and the essence of action beats throughout its chambers. 2 decades later, and it still kicks ass. Of course, it weren't quite done yet. Doom might be the pinnacle of their contribution to gaming, but their next project would still manage to shake things up. Thank you for watching, and until next time, farewell.